Thank you. Well, Shanti, thank you very much and welcome everyone. We're really delighted that you're here for this discussion this afternoon with the former members of Congress Association and also the Congressional Study Group on Japan. I want to give and extend a special thank you to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the chairman Satahiro Akimoto, who is joining this discussion and is participating and watching today. But the financial support and the vision with which the foundation has approached these issues allows us to have this sort of rich programming, and it's just incredibly helpful. My name is Peter Roskam. I serve on the board of directors of the former members of Congress Association, and it's a real joy for me to moderate this discussion with two experts on a part of the world that is becoming more and more complex and more involved and more as touch points for our lives today. And here to have a bipartisan discussion are two members of Congress, both of whom are familiar to you. The first is Marc Veasey, who represents the Dallas-Fort Worth area and serves for our discussion today on the Armed Services Committee, and also Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska, and also on the Armed Services Committee. And I think it would be interesting, Congressman Bacon, let's start with you, just kind of an opening primer of what's on the top of your mind, particularly as you're thinking about Pacific security issues and the priorities in this Congress. So welcome, and what's top of mind?
Well, thank you, Pete. I got to tell you, we sure miss you in Congress, and it's good to see you. And I want to just take a moment too to thank Marc Veasey. Though we're on separate parts of the Congress with the aisle in the middle of us, he's one of the friendly guys. He's always kind and gracious to folks on both sides of the aisle. So I sure appreciate him. My priorities in the Armed Services Committee is number one, I want to hold defense spending equal to inflation. I don't think it's the right time to increase spending above inflation with everything else going on. I surely think it's the wrong time to cut spending below inflation. The threats are growing. China is nearing our GDP. You still have Russia that actually has more nuclear weapons than we have and more modernized. You still have Iran as a regional threat in the Middle East. As part of that, my top priority within that budget is nuclear modernization. Today, our ICBMs are over 50 years old. Our B-52s are nearing 60 years old. Our submarine launched missiles, or submarines, excuse me, are at the end of their shelf life. And so we got to do all three. And strategic deterrence is job number one. Also, as part of my portfolio in the Armed Services Committee, electronic warfare is a top priority for mine. You know, in the mid-90s, we were the dominant electronic warfare power, and we showed it in Desert Storm. But because of our superiority, we defunded a lot of our EW programs, while China saw our capabilities and did just the opposite. Today, they have a dominant capability in this battle space. And if you want to communicate with your satellites, your aircraft, your ships, and so forth, you got to regain that spectrum. And finally, I'm a big supporter of the Asia bilateral agreements that we have. I would like to transition many of these to multilateral agreements where we try to make the Quad, quote, more of a multilateral capability, maybe eventually Indonesia as well. And with that, I'll just close with this line. America is the indispensable nation when it comes to defending our values, but we can't do it alone. We cannot counter China, Russia, Iran, all the other threats out there without great alliances, which means we need Japan, Australia, hopefully India down the road, and Indonesia even beyond that. So thanks with that, Pete. I yield back.
Okay, thank you. Representative Veasey, what's top of mind for you?
Yeah, top of mind for me is obviously making sure that we're spending our money wisely in the defense space. I'm back on the Armed Services Committee. I'm on Energy and Commerce, and last session I was not able to wave onto Armed Services Committee, but now I'm back on, and I serve on the Tactical Air and Land Committee. And I really do think that one of the areas where China is obviously going to try to dominate us is going to be really in all the spaces, and air, land, and sea. And we need to make sure that we're as prepared as possible. I think that means making sure that for the next fifth gen fighter, that we continue to invest in that program to make sure that we have that particular dominance for a fifth gen fighter that can take up the slack in so many different areas of our defense portfolio, hopefully saving us money down the road and allowing us to be able to perhaps not be as reliant on older platforms. I also think that it's going to be very critically important that we continue on the Armed Services Committee to pay very close attention to China. I was in Djibouti on a bipartisan CODAIL probably in 2017 with Jimmy Panetta and Austin Scott of Georgia. And it was really fascinating to go and learn about the Chinese building their base there in Djibouti, right there on the tip of Africa, along the waters, and a very strategic location, because they want to show the rest of the world and the United States that they're just as dominant as us. And so as they continue to sort of show themselves to want to be a rising power, how we counter that without, going into conflict with them, I think is going to be very tricky. I think that is going to require a great deal of diplomacy, but I also think that it's going to require us, again, spending our defense dollars wisely, so they can also see that we're still the preeminent power when it comes to weapons, when it comes to defense, and when it comes to deterrence. And so I think that we have our hands cut out for us, and not just for us, but really for future generations to come. So I think it's important that we get it right now.
Mark, with your permission, let's press in on that. You mentioned China in particular, and so let's unpack that a little bit. So we see Chinese aggression, South China Sea issues, Hong Kong, the provocative nature of the language surrounding Taiwan and so forth. Give us a glimpse into the Armed Services Committee as you're wrestling through these sorts of things. How do we make sure that we maintain a bipartisan commitment to this part of the world? And then what do you see as the best moves forward? Both you and Don have mentioned maintaining a level of fiscal discipline, and I think that resonates with most folks who realize that checks, you just can't write every check for everything. But how would you prioritize, and what should the U.S. be doing, particularly on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I think that thank you very much, Peter. I think that it's really important that we, the Armed Services Committee has traditionally been very bipartisan. And I think that it's important that we keep it that way, and that we try to maintain as much as we possibly can, very, similar understandings of China, and that that's what we're presenting to the American public. We've done a great job of that when it comes to Israel, for instance. And Israel has become, sort of a political football, but for the most part, the support that we give to Israel is overwhelmingly bipartisan. And I think that our approach to China has to be the same way, because we need to sell to the American public that it's going to cost us, a great deal of money as China continues to be a rising power, that it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of patience in order for us to be able to counter them and everything that they're doing. And not just what they're doing militarily in China, but again, the things that they're doing around the world. There are many disadvantages that we have in the United States. Like, I know that when I was in Africa, that I was very surprised to learn that the Chinese, regardless of human rights violations that these countries may be having, that they will fly these presidents and these leaders of these countries, give them a nice big house in China to vacation whenever they want to, go and pick them up, bring them back to China, and basically pick up the entire tab for them, regardless of, whatever they may be happening to do over there. And they're doing that because they want to put their footprint on the world, and part of them leaving their footprint and being the dominant power means how they're going to diminish us. And so I think that for those of us on the Armed Services Committee, as much as we can be, on the same page when it comes to warning the American people about China, I think it's going to be clearly, I think it's clearly going to be very important. I think it's tough to right now in the atmosphere that we're in, because people obviously want to sort of, gain the upper hand when it comes to, seeing who's going to be the toughest on China. But I think that as much as we can possibly avoid that is going to be critical, because it's going to be difficult. It's just not going to be easy to maintain this situation.
I think that's an interesting point, and who's driving the agenda and who's setting the pace, I think is going to be really, really important. Let me shift over to Don. Don, so you've got a unique experience that you were a commissioned Air Force officer. You got your commission as a second lieutenant in the mid '80s, and rose through the ranks as a flag officer, and and had that whole trajectory before coming to Congress. So through a military and a civilian lens, which you have, and thinking through the strategies, reflect on what Marc just said in terms of the nature of the Chinese threat in particular, and how on a bipartisan basis can the US and Congress in particular be placing a foundation that can resonate throughout the whole country.
Well, thank you. It's interesting as we look back, when you look at about 1990, we were hoping China would gain economic strength, become more integrated into the world's economy and trade, and that they would liberalize over time. And today they're almost equal to our GDP, but yet they've gone backwards when it comes to liberalism. I mean, they've become more totalitarian. You see what they're doing with Hong Kong. They're being more repressive to their own people. They've gone backwards. They've not embraced our values. And I think that we needed to wake up to that and say they couldn't just have their way with us anymore, economically and with trade. So I think that that's been the big transition this last decade. We woke up. We've realized China's not going to liberalize and come our way. They're actually going the other direction, and they've grown into become a more adversarial type relationship with us. And they clearly pose a threat to Taiwan, Japan, and their first inner island chain there. So that's, I think, point number one. The things that I think we can help prioritize out of Congress on this is that I believe in the last 2 or 3 decades, when you look at what we've done in Asia, it's been primarily bilateral relationships. And it's very important that we make sure Taiwan has a defense capability that serves as a deterrent. Same thing with Japan and our other allies. But I think we got to transition to now a more multilateral, like we have with NATO. I think that's the next phase here, because countries that share our values, we need to work together. And it can't just be point to point with Hawaii. It's got to be these countries also working together. So I think that that's something we can help try to transition our military into thinking. They're not there yet. And when it comes to capabilities, we need to prioritize, in my view. I mean, Marc was talking about 5th generation fighters. I think even more, maybe more important, if I may, the B-21 bomber is going to be incredibly important. To have the 100 to 150, you can launch them from way outside the air defense ring, and they're going to be the new stealth bombing capability. That is the capability that will actually deter China. It's hard to get your fighters that close to China, right? But the bombers will be able to. Also, excuse me, I've been losing my voice.
We all done that.
Yeah. So another area of concern, because of the INF treaty, China wasn't a part of that. And they have built a huge list of surface-to-surface missiles that can hit any of our bases in Asia. And we don't have anything to counter that. I think we need to find a way to counter that with our own capability. So but the problem is, where do you field them? Where do you operate them from? And I think we're going to need a surface-to-surface missile counter to China, and then our own B-21s. And that's going to be the deterrent and when it comes to our dealings with China. Beyond that, I think when I travel around the Far East, China throwing its economic power around. You can see it in Micronesia. The one thing that stands out to me, though, when I talk to these leaders, our values are still the #1 weapon. China could throw a lot of money at an issue, but the fact that we honor freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, that inspires people throughout the world. And I think we have to remember that our values unites us with our allies, and it is still our most potent weapon.
Let me press in a little bit. We talked quite a bit about China. They're not the only actors in the Pacific. Russia and North Korea have a presence there. How do those countries fill into this strategic question? Don, let me start with you, and then Mark, I'll come. Go ahead, Don. What do you think?
So,
Russia and North Korea.
In most areas, China is the pacing threat, but not with nuclear weapons. Right now, Russia is the pacing threat when it comes to strategic nuclear weapons. They've almost modernized, well, they've modernized 2/3 of their triad in recent years. We have not. We're behind. And Russia has a GDP much smaller, but they've developed a very potent nuclear capability there. And they've proven themselves to be antagonistic and nefarious in their designs. They want to encroach into our elections. They want to divide us. And not just us, they do the same thing with Japan. They'll do it, they do it in Europe. And so they're always seeking to undermine America and our values. And that's just a fact. And we just have to realize that and try to counter it. North Korea, the unclassified number that I've read is that they have 60 nuclear weapons. That is something that we have to, keep in consideration in dealing with them. And so when you look at that, plus you have Iran in the Middle East, it gets back to a point that I started with. The United States is indispensable in countering these threats, but we cannot do it alone. China alone equals our GDP. That's why we have to really invest in our alliances and make them stronger. Japan is indispensable to us, the indispensable nation for freedom. We can't do this in the Middle East, or the Far East, or in Asia, without a close relationship with Japan. And we got to continue connecting them with Australia. And then the next iteration is India and Indonesia beyond that. That is the only way, in my view, that we can counter these threats in the Pacific. And there'll be other allies as well, perhaps Vietnam, perhaps Philippines, and so forth. Our alliances will be key.
Mark, let me ask you this. So as I'm listening to the two of you talk, and we're talking about Russia, which has been in the news, and so many things going on in Russia over the past couple of years. And then my own father was an officer in the Korean War, and he came back in 1953. And yet this drama continues, for what, 60 plus years. And so here we're in this incredibly tumultuous part of the world. How do you size up, as an Armed Services Committee member, how do you size up the Russian threat, the North Korean threat, and compare it to the Chinese threat? And what advice would you have for our foreign policy teams as they're interacting with various allies around the world?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say, first of all, it's the Russian threat and the Chinese threat. I think where they have, similarities is that obviously, they want to continue to show their prowess. They wanted to undermine our values. I think that they think that our way of life is not sustainable here in the U.S., and that they want to demonstrate to the rest of the world that is the fact. I think that that's one of the reasons why, in addition to just being disruptive in the U.S., that the Russians continue to engage in disinformation programs on things like social media, is because they see us as fragile at this time. But they don't think that that our way of life is good for the future, and that is sustainable for the future. And I think the Russians share that same sentiment that you can't have a multicultural democracy, and that ultimately that their way of totalitarianism and not having democracy is what works. I think that what's scary about North Korea is that I do believe in North Korea that ultimately for them, it really is just more about power. and them wanting to demonstrate that the Korean Peninsula can be reunited, and that it can live under the Northern values as one country, and that they're determined to do that. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it is, should worry all of us with the number of nuclear weapons that they're accumulating, the launches that they try, because they're moving towards a goal. That's one of the reasons why Un is so adamant that someone in his lineage stay in power. I mean, he had one of his own siblings killed because he wanted to make sure that line of thinking continued to be what's going to propel North Korea in the future. And when you have someone that is, I think that brazen and just that unstable, and that really just wants to accumulate that much power, that they pose an existential threat to the United States, and in ways that I don't think China and Russia, quite do.
It's interesting. So then it's kind of picking up on the China theme again. When you were in Djibouti, for example, and saw their military posture there, that's consistent with this larger strategic theme that you articulated a couple of minutes ago. That is Chinese commercial activity, their Belt and Road Initiative, basically hooking these countries on a level of debt and obligation that's really, really significant. I was in Sri Lanka a few years ago, and the Chinese had built a massive port there, and the Sri Lankans couldn't make the payments. There were changes in the government and so forth. And China basically said, no problem, you don't have to make the payments. We'll just take the port from you. Thank you very much, which was a complete hustle and a manipulation. And it is a massive port. And if my memory serves, don't hold my feet to the fire, but something like 40% of the world's trade goes by, within 50 miles of that port, just breathtakingly strategic. So I think that the people who are on and are watching the two of you right now and are listening to you both discuss things and discern what they're longing for is a bipartisan consensus that comes out of this, where people say, okay, there's some level-headed, clear-thinking members of Congress that understand incremental steps and that and can work together across the aisle. And you would know that in particular based on serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the biggest jurisdiction of all of Congress. It's just massive, and all of those challenges there, and yet all the challenges that you face in the Energy and Commerce Committee are diminished somewhat if we're not able to have a robust foreign policy against a worldwide actor that's clearly just has gone from being fairly friendly to becoming adversarial, and it's really difficult. So I didn't mean to filibuster you there, man. But
yeah, no. I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, that's all I was saying.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, that was one of the things that worried me so much about us not being able to, get the trade deal done under Obama when he was trying to get it done. And we really need to sit down with the business community, with labor, and figure out how we're going to play a role, not just in Asia, but in other parts of the world, so the Chinese don't fill that vacuum. Yeah. Because my biggest fear is that, Don talked earlier about how we can still sell democracy, freedom of speech, and those things people, I think, hold, very, dear to their heart. I also think that obviously economic growth is hugely important, people being able to be employed. And if we let the Chinese come in and fill that void, then I think that we have to, consider that in the future that some of these countries, will become like some of the African leaders that I talked about, how they just are more really interested in what's in it for them, and for them being able to keep their tenure in office for as long as they wish to. And when we need to try to do everything that we can to prevent that from happening. I know the Chinese, they're even looking at investing in places in Central America. And right now we have a huge issue in Central America, obviously with migration. And so how we're going to, be the force that's going to come in and help stabilize an area that is, just to the south of us before an actor like the Chinese come in and try to fill that, I think is very serious. I think on a lot of business and commerce issues, one of the areas that obviously is gaining more and more traction is climate change. And you probably know that General Motors announced that they're going to, have all electric vehicles by 2035. We really need to think about the fact that the Chinese control so much of the components that we need for these batteries in these vehicles. And that's really scary to think about. And we really have to, if we're going to do that, we really need to figure out how we can manufacture all of those things here, because we would hate to be that dependent on China controlling such a major part of our industry and our economy here in America, and just sort of turn that much of our future over to them. I think that it's going to be a huge challenge. And even though it's more business and commerce related, ultimately it really is going to affect our national security here. That was one of the reasons why we didn't let the Smithfield pork sale go through, because we knew that it wasn't a good idea to let them control that much of the pork industry here in our country. And so we have our challenges cut out for us on the business side and the defense side. But ultimately, even the things that are more business oriented, like the trade deals and like, the components for batteries, all those things ultimately go back to our nation's security.
Don, what do you think about that insofar as, what Mark laid out, and then you could kind of put a COVID overlay on that in terms of lessons learned. He mentioned the climate issue and battery technology and so forth. One of the lessons that we learned from COVID was a level of vulnerability on certain types of medical equipment and supplies that we need. How does that fit into your calculus? I don't know if you ever served as a supply officer during all your tours, but it would seem to me that your head would be in this game in terms of understanding supply vulnerabilities.
I was always a little more on the operations side, but without good logistics, you can't fly, right? And the supply chain, we did learn, is very vulnerable to China. On one end, you have strategic kinds of supplies, and we have to ensure we're not procuring them from China. You don't want to get your computer chips, for example, from China, because they could be corrupted, or there could be some nefarious things done to them that could hurt us. But we often focus on that and not the lesser important stuff that you got to have. For example, penicillin. China has a corner of the market there. Do we want to be dependent on one country when it comes to our antibiotics? I would say no. So we do have to diversify, hopefully within our own country, but if not, at least with our allies as other sources. And to piggyback on Congressman Veasey's comments, there's 4 instruments of power, and I do think China is really doing a great job with its economic instrument of power. It's wielding it in a very strong way, and we got to raise our game in that area. We're going to have to compete, like right now in Micronesia, where China's coming in wanting to buy ports. But we're going to have to contend in that battle space. But to do that, again, it's going to take us making it a priority in our country, but we can't do it all alone. That's why we got to cooperate again with Australia and Japan and other countries to do that right. And to also piggyback on Mark's comments, I think we missed an opportunity. I support TPP. That was an opportunity to build an economic partnerships with, I think, 12 different countries. I think it was 12. And that would have helped us compete against China much better. But walking away from that allowed China, it gave them great leverage to work one-on-one with these other 12 countries to block us out. Fortunately, both the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee opposed TPP. I think it was a mistake. I don't think it's too late to try to go back and try to salvage that and try to get back into that agreement in some capacity. If we want to compete with China, we got to do it as part of an alliance.
That makes perfect sense. Let me, we're going to go to questions in 1 minute or in a couple of minutes. So if you've got a question for Congressman Veasey or Congressman Bacon, just go to the Q&A section, type it in, and we're going to get to as many questions as we possibly can. One of the things that struck me in both of your opening remarks, each of you focused in on this notion of fiscal discipline around the Department of Defense. And I think that resonates with most people. This notion of burden sharing is something that became really, really sensitive as it relates to these alliances in particular. And Donald Trump had that, you know, his way of doing things, which was aggressive and brash and you know, kind of off-putting from some people's point of view. But there was kind of part of it where people were kind of like, I don't know, I sort of like the idea of us pushing some of these countries to contribute more greatly. I know this happened a lot in the Korean context over the past couple of years in particular. How does this current debate strike you both as thoughtful members of the Armed Services Committee? Don, let's start with you. Burden sharing and particularly your perspective of somebody who's you know, led airmen and so forth. What do you think?
Well, you know, through President Trump and Secretary Pompeo, NATO increased their military spending by $135 billion. That's a success. I didn't really care for the way they did it. I believe when you have friends, you talk more in private and you don't chastise them as much in public. Chastise your opponents in public would be the preferred way. I think there was some weakening of our relationships because of the abrasive manner in which it was done. So I give it a plus and a minus there. On the plus side, you know, NATO's increased spending $135 billion. Korea increased spending. Japan did. But we could have been done in a more positive way to keep our relationship strong. When it comes to the overall fiscal responsibility of DoD, when I came in 2017, I had been retired for 3 years, and our military was suffering. The readiness level was the lowest it's what has been since 1977. Our Air Force were flying about half the hours of what they did in the 90s. We had people not qualified on Navy ships. That's why they were colliding. We had 58 combat brigades in the Army. Only 3 could deploy. Only half the Navy aircraft could fly any given day. I gave you stat after stat. We needed to turn that around. And we increased defense spending by about 10%. It had been cut by about 16% in the previous 7 years. And so I think we found the sweet spot. We're in the spot right now, sitting around 750 billion, where our readiness is being restored. It largely has been restored. And our modernization is slowly getting back on track. We had a 20-year hole in modernizing much of our, I'll say our near peer capable type weapons, because we were focused on Iraq and Afghanistan. So we had a 20-year roughly hiatus with some exceptions like the F-35, but we got to dig our way out of that. You can't do it overnight. I think we're at the right spot if we keep that spending even with inflation, where each year we'll get a little healthier. But if we go backwards, we'll be back to where we were at 4 years ago, and that would not be a good thing. I think on the Republican side right now, I sense roughly about a 90% agreement to keep spending where it's at with inflation. I think on Congressman Veasey's side, there's probably a little more of a tug of war, maybe a 50-50 on that. I don't know, I'll leave that with him. But I think we're going to be in a good spot this year to sustain where we're at. I think next year will be the debate there. And it is my hope, and I think Secretary of Defense Austin agrees, that we're at the right spot. We don't need to go higher, but if we go lower, it'll put us backwards.
Mark, how does that strike you? Just and could you also touch on what your view is on the burden sharing question, particularly with, you know, Korea and Japan?
I do think that we're in a really good spot to keep spending, you know, where it is right now, to keep, like Don just said, not any higher, not any lower. I really do think where if you look at the what we have in the House right now on the Democratic side, and where we sort of sit with the majority that we have, that sort of outlook is probably more is very likely. I think that shifting over to our foreign partners, it was interesting. Another coattail that I was on several years ago. One of the first questions that they asked me when I got to Italy was the guy said, "Oh wow, we saw on your bio that you're from Fort Worth," and I was like, "Yes," and they were like, "We know that you have the Lockheed plant there, the Malone plant," and he was like, "We modeled our plant here after that particular facility because they're one of our partners on F-35." And obviously, that's something that benefits, them. Obviously, it's something that obviously they're going to be able to employ people the same way that we employ people here. And so not only is it good for their defense, but it's good for their economy. And we certainly do, like Representative Bacon was saying, when it comes to our adversaries, to our friends, not participating at the level that they should, we certainly need to have those conversations with them. We shouldn't treat them like adversaries and belittle them in public because I think that weakens our alliance, particularly with the behavior that we've seen from players like Russia, like Iran, that would see that as an opportunity to sort of seize upon to sow discord in our country and in our partners' countries. But they need to pay their fair share. I think that this is going to be the only way that all of us going to work moving forward, particularly as you really do have more scrutiny and I think more of a demand from the American public that these countries share, their part. I think historically looking back, and you think about the Cold War, people were so concerned about communism and the spread of communism around the world that I think that people were okay with us sort of shouldering so much of the burden. But if you look at not just the United States, but really at the rest of the world, people have just become more inward looking in their views on things. And I don't necessarily think that is a good thing to sort of look inward like that. But the fact of the matter is that at this moment in time, that's where we sit. And I think that there's an expectation because of that if this is going to be a value for us to continue to want to maintain democracy and maintain strategic relationships with our partners, I think the American public looking into how these relationships are beneficial to us from a fiscal standpoint is just going to become more and more of the norm.
I think that's well said. So we've got some questions. Shanti, why don't we start opening it up for questions? If you've got a question for Congressman Veasey or Congressman Bacon, all you've got to do is go to the Q&A section, type it in, and if it's interesting and charming, we'll ask it. No, I'm teasing. If it's, we're going to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So Shanti, why don't you go ahead with the first question?
All right, so the first question we have is directed at Representative Bacon. The question is, you mentioned a future partnership with Indonesia a couple of times. How far in the future do you think such a partnership is? In your view, what should a US-Indonesia partnership look like, and what steps do you think each country needs to take to achieve it?
Thank you so much. I see it as a future goal. I think the immediate goal is strengthening the multilateral ties between us, Australia, and Japan, and helping encourage Japan and Australia to work more closely together too. And there's other countries like New Zealand that can fit into that as well. I think India is very important to bring into this fold. We call it the Quad for those who may not be familiar with that term. With Quad with India, Australia, Japan, and America. And I think that's probably the initial immediate goal beyond Australia and Japan. But I think there's an opportunity here with Indonesia. It's a very large country. I don't want to misquote the number, but they're just a little behind America in population, their democracy. They're expanding their free market system. I think there's an opportunity if we nurture this relationship that instead of a quad relationship, we can get a fifth partner maybe in the next decade, or maybe it'd be 2 decades from now. I don't know. I think my sense of working with the Indonesians is that they increasingly share our outlook and our values, and I think we should invest in that.
Shanti, next question.
All right. And this is not directly to either of you, so just in general to both of you. What is Congress's perspective on the role that Southeast Asia should play in U.S. strategy in the Indo-Pacific?
Mark, you want to lead on that?
Yeah, no, I think that Southeast Asia should certainly, play a role. Again, I think that we should look in the United States economically and defense-wise, where we can strengthen our relationships with partners in Southeast Asia, and I think that it's something that we obviously should, do, as fairly quickly as we can, as China is definitely not going to go to sleep anytime here soon. There are obviously, some players in Southeast Asia, like in Vietnam, where they don't necessarily, share our same values when it comes to, certain freedoms and what have you. But I still think that they can be key partners, because a lot of them are very concerned about China as well. And we need to look where we can to see how we can strengthen those relationships and continue to work to show how it's beneficial not only to those Southeast Asian partners, but to the United States as well.
Great. John,
we do have some opportunities there. The Philippines, we historically have had a very close relationship with them. And there's some challenges under the current leader, but I still think we should be working on that, because in the long term, I think the Philippines are very important, especially with Subic Bay and other assets that the Philippines has. Of course, a great relationship with Thailand, Singapore. So there's lots of opportunities to strengthen these multilateral and bilateral relationships there. And I just want to make a point too, that Taiwan is, I think, something that we can't just gloss over. I've been in these hearings where people want to just gloss over that. We can't. Frankly, the flashpoint, the most likely flashpoint with China will very likely involve Taiwan. And we've had a policy of some ambiguity there. I'm not sure ambiguity is wise when it's coming to Taiwan. I think maybe we should have more unambiguity and ensure that Taiwan has the capabilities, provide a fulsome self-defense with the intent of providing deterrence. There may be scaring China from doing anything rash. But then again, it's not by itself. That's why I think the question on Southeast Asia, Taiwan's gonna be a part of that. And all these other countries I mentioned are important as part of that strategic environment.
Yeah, Peter, can I add this also? And, earlier in one of the questions that was posed, I talked about just how quickly things can turn. And I think that Representative Bacon's point about the Philippines and how they have a leader right now that's very challenging, that's the sort of thing that we should be concerned about, not just long term, but really short term. You think about the strong relationship that we had with the Philippines for so long. We have so many, Americans now whose families come from the Philippines because of those that strong relationship that we had, but because of poverty and other issues and challenges that they've had there, the situation and what people there deem as acceptable as part of the normalcy can change so quickly, and I think that's what concerns me about countries like China in particular, because they have the resources, not so much Russia, but China, just because they have everything that's needed as they continue to be a rising power to make people, turn the other cheek or maybe just look the other way as China shows them what they can do for them. And to me, it's very concerning. I think it's something that should keep all of us up at night.
Mark, you're reminding me of a line that John Boehner, when he was Speaker of the House, used to lay on people that were not familiar with DC. He said, Washington is the slowest place until it's the fastest place. And what you're describing is the world is the slowest place. Nothing's going on until it's the fastest place, you know, and then all of a sudden, longtime ally shifts, leadership shifts, you know, and it can happen. It can happen pretty quickly. So I think that's a point well taken. Shanti, let's go to the next question.
Yes, and this one works well off of the discussion that just came up, but kind of more about the American public. So getting your perspectives on that would be great. I mean, this is not directed at one person in general. If China invaded Taiwan, would the American public really support going to war with China over an island on the other side of the world that most have never even heard of? I fear Xi is betting on the US not having its public support to respond to Chinese aggression against Taiwan, increasing the chances of a conflagration. Thank you.
What do you think, Mark?
You know, I know that we have a pretty, you know, decent number of Taiwanese Americans here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I meet with them occasionally and met with them maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And it's a huge concern to them, like what, you know, how strong is the relationship that we have with their country, or with their home countries, I should say, as all of them are U.S. citizens now. But, you know, and part of what fuels that anxiety is they can see what's happening in Hong Kong right now. And they know that if the Chinese ever saw the opportunity, and they believe that the Chinese want the opportunity to come to Taiwan and put it under its wing and make it a part of China, as they already see it as a part of China, and letting them know that we stand with them, I think is hugely important. It's such a I haven't had a chance to visit Taiwan yet. I want to make sure that I go. The stories that I've heard about what an advanced country it is, the high-speed rail systems that they have there, I just think that it's such a great opportunity for America to have a long-term strategic partnership with them, the same way how we have with our European partners, if we're serious about making sure that the Chinese you know, can't be disruptive over there and continue to grow their strength in a negative way. Making sure that they know that we're with them at all points, I think, is going to be crucial. I do think that, again, selling that to the American public, I would need to think longer about what that looks like if we ever got to that situation where we felt like we needed to, you know, have some sort of armed conflict with the United States, again, with people right at this moment in history right now, seemingly much more inward. Would they support us doing that? Especially when you go back and you look at the Korean War, you look at the Vietnam War, where we were not able to achieve the same sort of victories that we were in World War II. Would that be something that would be palatable? And I think that really is very debatable.
Don, what do you think?
I did get to travel to Taiwan. I spent about a week in Taipei. It was incredible. And Mark, it is economically so developed. They're free, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. I was on the 150-mile-an-hour train ride, which was incredible. But the question is important because deterrence hinges on two things. Do you have the capability and do you have the will? And the will thing would vary from president to president, perhaps. That's why I think it's so important what we do now. And I think Mark also brought a good point. What happened in Hong Kong was it shook the ground under Taiwan. They know there is no such thing as one China, two systems. Right. What happened in Hong Kong, they realized that just given time with Taiwan, their freedoms will be taken away. It was so counterproductive from a strategic sense what China did. You know, and they tend to do that. So does Russia. When Russia invaded Crimea, they pushed Ukraine into the Western camp, the opposite thing of what they really wanted to do. And China did that with Taiwan with its actions in Hong Kong. I think the most important thing when it comes to deterrence is what we do now. We need to strengthen our economic ties with Taiwan. We need to give them the capability so that this phrase is used a lot when I'm there, that Taiwan becomes the porcupine and that China will not want to swallow it. And you do that by giving them anti-shipping missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and the ability to be that porcupine, hard to swallow for China. And so I think, too, we should always say we have not lost a commitment of maybe one day the two countries merging, but it would have to be under a democratic China, a China that shares our values, a China that shares Taiwan's values. And today, they're nowhere close.
Shanti, let's go to the next question.
All right. This one is about Myanmar. What can the U.S. do to stop bloodshed and violence in Myanmar? What is on the minds of congressional leaders, and what is their coordination with the White House regarding Myanmar? Sanctions may make lawmakers and policymakers happy that we have done something about democracy and human rights, but we all know the track record of sanctions is not great. Sanctions which have been introduced by the Biden administration against the Myanmar military and its front companies will only make economic and social lives of the people there more difficult and likely push the military closer to China, which is not a geostrategic interest of the US. This is an early test case for this administration and the Congress. And this is to either of you.
Mark, I saw you nod. What do you think on the Myanmar question?
Yeah, no, I would be very concerned about the actions that we take, pushing them closer to China, which is something that, you know, we don't need right now. Obviously, the human rights violations there are, you know, are terrible, but it's something I'm going to continue to watch very closely. I think it's a huge challenge that could spin much further out of control if we're not careful. But again, because of the China situation, I think it's very delicate.
Don, how do you balance this tension with these human rights issues and the violations and what Mark laid out as a flashpoint danger of pushing Myanmar even closer into the arms of China?
I don't think most people would not be supportive of any military intervention with Myanmar. So I would say then we're forced to work with neighboring countries to isolate them. And I realize, I think the person who asked the question is correct. If you talk economic sanctions, you're in the end hurting the people. But I think you can still isolate the military, isolate the leadership. So I don't really have a good answer on this either. I don't think military intervention is an option, and ignoring it is not an option. So that leaves diplomatic and economic levers that we can use. And so those would be the areas I would look at if I was in the Biden administration. How do we diplomatically isolate them? How do we isolate their military there? And I think fundamentally, when you put the spotlight on values and human rights, people still get embarrassed, right? And I think we just have to we have to have moral clarity in what they're doing. Same thing with China, same thing with Russia. You know, when Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, we didn't know how hard that was for him, but it was a gut punch that really shook him up. And I think that we don't use enough of this moral clarity with countries that are having a coup and mistreating its people. And so, unfortunately, that's about the best answer I have right now with that. It's a tough question.
Well, you have both been generous with your time. Now, I want you to look at your watches, because your watches will tell you that you were within the time period FMC said we were going to land. So we have a high value of your time. And I will say, I think that if most Americans could zoom in on a conversation like this between the two of you, they would come away really heartened. You know what I mean? They'd say, hey, these are smart people that are committed to the country, committed to their constituencies, know what they're talking about, are not screaming at one another on cable television. And there's, you know, I just think that you've demonstrated how to act in ways that really are easy to get to the policy questions. And I know I speak on behalf of everybody that was listening today when I say thank you on behalf of the former members of Congress and the Congressional Study Group on Japan. And I want to give a special thank you then also to the Sasakawa Foundation, and particularly to Chairman Akimoto for their vision and their willingness to commit so generously financially. So on behalf of FMC, Mark and Don, thank you both. I look forward to our paths continuing to cross, and I will hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Peter.